Have you ever missed someone who never truly existed? Not a stranger, not a fictional character, a real person, someone you knew, someone you loved, someone you still think about, late at night. But here's the unsettling question. Do you actually miss who they were? Or do you miss who you believed they could become? That single question has the power to change the way you understand every relationship you've ever had. Because the human mind possesses a remarkable ability. It doesn't merely observe reality. It quietly edits it. Imagine standing before an unfinished painting. The artist has only painted half the picture. The rest is nothing but empty canvas. Most people would simply say, it's unfinished. But your brain does something extraordinary. It begins filling in the missing colors, the missing details, the missing story. Without asking permission, relationships often begin the very same way. You meet someone. You know almost nothing about them. A few conversations, a shared laugh, a kind gesture, a moment of eye contact. And before long, your mind begins writing the chapters that haven't happened yet. You imagine the future vacations, the late-night conversations, the life you might build together. The person standing before you becomes only half the story. The other half is written by your imagination. Psychologists call this idealization, the tendency to exaggerate another person's positive qualities while quietly ignoring their flaws. Not because we're foolish, because the brain prefers complete stories over incomplete information. Imagine reading the first chapter of a mystery novel. You don't know who the villain is. You don't know how the story ends. Yet almost immediately, your mind begins making predictions. This character seems trustworthy. That one feels suspicious. Without realizing it, your brain fills in the missing pages. Sometimes it's correct. Often it isn't. The psychologist Fritz Heider suggested that human beings naturally try to make sense of incomplete information by creating coherent explanations. The brain would rather have an imperfect story than no story at all. And perhaps that explains why first impressions feel so powerful. Not because we know the person, because we believe we already do. But here's where the illusion becomes dangerous. The longer we believe the story we've created, the harder it becomes to see the person standing in front of us. Instead, we begin loving our own imagination. And once that happens, reality starts feeling like disappointment. But why does the brain choose fantasy over truth? Why does it keep protecting the version of someone that exists only inside our own minds? The answer lies deep within one of the oldest survival systems ever built into the human brain. And once you understand it, you may never fall in love with potential the same way again. Think about the last time you admired someone At first, everything they did seemed extraordinary. Their smile, their voice, the way they walked into a room, even their flaws, appeared charming. But months later, something changed. The very habits you once adored became the reasons you argued. The mystery faded. The fantasy disappeared. What happened? Did they suddenly become a different person? Or did your brain finally stop filling in the missing pieces? Neuroscientists believe that in the early stages of emotional attachment, the brain is flooded with powerful chemicals. Among them, dopamine, the molecule that fuels anticipation, motivation, and reward. When someone new captures your attention, your brain doesn't simply observe them. It begins searching for reasons to keep pursuing them. Notice something fascinating. When you're buying your dream car, your mind notices every reason why it's the perfect choice. The comfortable seats, the beautiful design, the smooth drive, the small flaws barely register. Relationships often begin the same way. Your attention becomes selective. You notice everything that supports your attraction and quietly ignore everything that challenges it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Once the brain forms an emotional conclusion, it naturally searches for evidence that confirms what it already believes. Imagine wearing rose-colored glasses. The world itself hasn't changed, only the lens through which you see it. Idealization is that emotional lens. It doesn't create a better person. It creates a different perception. The psychologist Leon Festinger discovered that when our beliefs and reality begin to conflict, the mind often tries to reduce the discomfort rather than immediately accept the truth. Suppose someone repeatedly breaks your trust. Instead of asking, is this relationship healthy? The mind quietly whispers, they're just stressed. They didn't mean it. They'll change. Not because the evidence supports it. Because your brain is trying to protect the story it has already invested in. The more time, emotion, and hope you invest, the more difficult it becomes to admit that your imagination may have been more beautiful than reality. Think about an old photograph. Every time you look at it, your memory softens the difficult moments. The laughter becomes louder. The pain becomes quieter. Eventually, you stop remembering the relationship. You begin remembering the feeling you wished it had given you. That's why, after a breakup, people often miss the fantasy more than the person. They don't miss what actually happened. They miss what they hoped would happen. And hope is one of the most powerful creations of the human mind. But hope without truth can quietly become an emotional prison, because every time Reality disappoints you. Your imagination offers another promise. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next month. Maybe if I try harder. The dream survives, even while the relationship slowly falls apart. But there is another reason idealization becomes so difficult to escape. A reason hidden deep inside your identity itself. Because sometimes the person you think you're protecting isn't them. It's the version of yourself that only existed when you believed the dream was still alive. Imagine spending years building a castle out of clouds. Every tower is beautiful. Every window perfect. Every room filled with hope. Then one day, the wind changes and the castle disappears. Not because someone destroyed it, because it was never made of stone. Many relationships end this way, not with a betrayal, not with a fight, but with reality, quietly replacing imagination. And perhaps that's why the pain feels so unbearable. You're not only losing the person, you're losing the future. Your mind spent months, or even years, creating the holidays you imagined together, the home you pictured, the conversations that never happened, the life that existed only inside your imagination. The psychologist Daniel Gilbert has spent years studying how the human mind imagines the future. His research suggests that we're surprisingly good at creating emotional futures, but remarkably poor at predicting what those futures will actually feel like. Your brain doesn't simply imagine tomorrow. It begins living there. And once you've emotionally invested in an imagined future, letting go can feel like losing a real memory, even though it never happened. Think about watching a movie trailer. In just 2 minutes, your mind creates expectations. You imagine how exciting the full movie will be. Sometimes, the trailer is better than the film itself. Relationships can work the same way. The first few moments become the trailer. Your imagination creates the movie. Reality eventually arrives. But reality rarely competes with perfection. Notice something strange. When people finally leave an unhealthy relationship, they often say, "I miss who they used to be." But do they? Or do they miss the version their mind created during the beginning? The beginning, when every promise felt believable, every apology felt sincere, every dream felt possible. Sometimes, we aren't grieving a real person. We're grieving the character our imagination wrote for them. And the human mind is incredibly loyal to its own stories. The psychologist Jerome Bruner believed that people naturally understand their lives through stories. We don't just remember events. We organize them into narratives. Heroes, villains, happy endings, second chances. The problem begins when the story becomes more important than the truth, because once you're attached to the story, every red flag feels like a temporary obstacle. Every lie becomes understandable. Every disappointment becomes another chapter. Before the happy ending, the mind whispers, just wait. The ending hasn't arrived yet. But life isn't a novel. Not every story ends the way we hoped it would. And perhaps the bravest thing a person can do is stop asking, how can I save this story? And begin asking, is this story still telling the truth? Because healing doesn't begin when the other person changes. It begins when you finally stop editing reality to protect an illusion. But there is one final illusion, more powerful than all the others. The illusion that if you had only loved them more, been more patient, or tried a little harder, the ending would have been different. And once we uncover that final illusion, everything changes. Here's the truth that many people spend their entire lives trying to avoid. You cannot love someone into becoming a different person. Read that again. You cannot love someone into becoming a different person, because love has the power to inspire, but it cannot replace another person's choices. Imagine standing in front of a mirror. No matter how brightly you shine a flashlight onto the reflection, the person inside the mirror will never become real. You can chain the light, you can chain the angle, but you cannot chain the reflection itself. Idealization works the same way. We keep believing that if we become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, the person will finally become the version we've imagined. But often, the only thing changing is the amount of ourselves we're willing to sacrifice. The psychologist Carl Jung once suggested that we don't see people as they are. We see them through the lens of ourselves, our hopes, our fears, our desires, our unfinished wounds. Sometimes, we're not falling in love with another person. We're falling in love with the part of ourselves we hope they'll heal. Think about an empty room. Project a beautiful image onto the wall, and suddenly, the room feels magical. But remove the projector, and the wall returns to exactly what it always was. The wall never changed, only the image did. Many relationships follow that exact pattern. At first, we project our dreams, our expectations, our fantasies. Eventually, life turns off the projector, and for the first time, we're forced to meet the real person. Some relationships grow stronger because reality is even better than imagination. Others collapse not because someone changed, because they never were who we imagined in the first place. This is why acceptance is one of the rarest forms of love. Not loving someone's potential, not loving who they might become, but seeing who they are today, completely, clearly, without editing. The picture. The psychologist Carl Rogers believed that genuine relationships begin when people are accepted as they truly are, rather than as someone wishes they would become. Real love doesn't require illusion. It requires honesty. Honesty about the other person, and honesty about ourselves. Ask yourself a difficult question. If this person never changed, not tomorrow, not next year, not ever, would I still choose this relationship? If the answer is no, perhaps you were never in love with reality. You were in love with possibility, and possibilities, while beautiful, cannot build healthy relationships. Reality can. Perhaps that is why letting go feels like waking up from a dream. At first, the truth hurts, but eventually, you become grateful that you finally opened your eyes. Because once you stop falling in love with potential, you create space for something extraordinary. Someone who doesn't need to become your dream, because they already treat you with the respect, honesty, and peace you were searching for all along. And that is where real love begins. Not inside imagination, but inside reality. The reality you no longer need to rewrite. But before we end, there is one final truth that may be the hardest to accept. The greatest illusion was never about the other person. It was about ourselves. Because every time we idealize someone, we quietly surrender a part of our own reality. We begin asking, what do they need? What are they feeling? How can I make this work? Until one day, we stop asking the most important question of all. What do I need? Imagine holding a beautiful painting so close to your face that you can no longer see the entire picture. Every brushstroke seems perfect. Every color captivates you. Only when you take a step back do you notice the cracks, the unfinished edges, and the details you couldn't see before. Distance doesn't always destroy love. Sometimes it reveals truth. Think about how many times you ignored your own intuition, the uneasy feeling in your stomach, the promises that never became actions, the excuses that never stopped. Deep down, a part of you already knew, but hope kept speaking louder than truth. The human mind is remarkably creative. It can turn a single act of kindness into proof that someone has changed forever. It can transform one sincere apology into a future that doesn't yet exist. Not because reality changed, because hope filled in the empty spaces. Hope is beautiful. It gives us strength during difficult times. It keeps us moving when life feels impossible. But hope without honesty becomes denial. And denial is one of the quietest prisons the mind can build. The psychologist Abraham Maslow believed that healthy human growth begins when we stop living only for survival and start living with authenticity. Authenticity means seeing life as it is, not as we wish it would be. It means accepting that some people enter our lives not to stay forever, but to teach us what we should never settle for again. Perhaps that relationship didn't fail. Perhaps it completed its purpose. It revealed what respect looks like when it's missing, what trust feels like when it's broken, and what peace is worth protecting. Every painful ending leaves behind a lesson. Some people carry only the pain. Others carry the wisdom. The choice has always been ours. So the next time you catch yourself missing someone, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, do I miss who they truly were? Or do I miss the story my mind created? That single question may save you from returning to a chapter that was never meant to become your entire book. Before you leave, I want you to reflect on one final question. Have you ever fallen in love with someone's potential, only to realize you never truly knew who they were? Share your answer in the comments below. You never know. Your story might become the reason someone else finally chooses reality over illusion. If this journey helped you see the hidden patterns of the human mind, welcome to Ancient Whisper. Here, we explore psychology, philosophy, human behavior, and the invisible forces that shape our relationships, our choices, and our lives. If you're ready to understand people, not through fantasy, but through truth, subscribe and join us on the next journey. Until then, remember this: the people who truly belong in your life will never require your imagination to become worthy of your love. Reality, when it's healthy, is always more beautiful than the fantasy your mind was afraid to let go of.